Welcome to Breaking News to Trading Moves. Today we're looking at a corporate security event involving the South Korean e-commerce company Coupang. The whole situation, and especially the regulatory response, gives us a really clear window into what happens in the market when a major platform security gets put under the microscope. Our goal is to give you a clear overview of what happened, the technical areas it touched, and of course who stands to win and who might lose as companies adjust their security spending to deal with this exact kind of insider threat.
Right, and the whole thing really hinges on one central point of tension. Coupang came out and said the leaked customer data was deleted. But, and this is the key part, South Korea's official investigation is still completely open. That gap, that uncertainty, is what's driving everything. The market reaction, the regulatory pressure, all of it.
Okay, so let's get into the specifics of the event with Coupang. That's ticker CPNG. This is really all about an internal security failure, which, is something regulators everywhere are focusing on more and more. So the basics are this. A former employee managed to access and download personal information. Coupang later came out and put a number on it, saying the data was linked to about 3,000 customers.
And it's important to see what Coupang's defense was right out of the gate. They claimed the former employee deleted the data and, crucially, didn't share it with anyone else. That claim is very clearly designed to minimize the damage, right? To hopefully reduce the penalties. In these situations, if you can prove you contained the breach and the data is gone, that's your best defense against the worst financial outcomes.
But trying to prove a negative like that, especially to a government regulator that's already skeptical, is incredibly hard. And this is exactly where the friction started. We saw an immediate and pretty direct reaction from South Korea's Ministry of Science.
Absolutely. The ministry made a point to publicly state that its investigation is still ongoing. And here's the critical detail. They have not confirmed Coupang's claim that the data was deleted. That puts a really heavy burden of proof back on the company. Coupang can't just say it's deleted. They have to produce solid forensic evidence. I mean, they need to map the data's entire journey, prove it was permanently destroyed from whatever device it was on, and show it never hit an external network. That's a very complex and time-consuming process.
And the regulator didn't just stop there, did they? They actually criticized the company's behavior. The ministry took issue with Coupang for going public with their side of the story before the official investigation was over. And that little detail says a lot about the relationship there. It suggests the ministry saw it as Coupang trying to manage the public narrative, maybe trying to control the stock price for CPNG before they had actually met their compliance obligations. That's a really bad look. From a regulator's perspective, that procedural criticism can sometimes be a sign that stricter scrutiny or even higher fines are coming. They want to see cooperation and adherence to the process. When a company tries to get ahead of the official findings, it can look like they're not taking it seriously.
It's also really important to remember the context here for Coupang. They were already under microscope because of reports about a much larger security issue in their past.
Yeah.
That earlier event led to a lot of negative press and even a U.S. securities class action lawsuit. So, the market and the regulators were already on high alert when it comes to Coupang's data security. This new incident just feeds into those existing concerns. That history is exactly why the regulators' refusal to confirm the deletion claim carries so much weight. The fact that this is still unresolved means the reputational risk, the potential for big fines, it's all still very much in play for Coupang's CPNG. The market just hates uncertainty, especially regulatory uncertainty. It's often punished more harshly than a confirmed bad outcome. So until the ministry gives the official all clear, Coupang is operating under this cloud of liability.
Okay, so let's move on to the market response. Who are the winners here?
Well, the moment an incident like this at Coupang becomes public, a couple of things happen. Consumer platforms get nervous, and their security budgets suddenly get a lot more flexible. These events are powerful catalysts, forcing any company with a lot of user data to immediately tighten up their access controls. The regulator is watching, so Coupang and its peers are under pressure to prove they're improving their security. This leads to a rush of spending on very specific types of security tools. We generally see that spending fall into three main buckets.
And the first, and probably the quickest to see that spending, would be the endpoint and zero-trust security platforms.
And exactly.
The failure here was that an employee, probably using a company device, was able to pull data they shouldn't have. So the question for every other company becomes, once someone is already inside your network, how do you stop them from doing damage? So for a company like Coupang, the immediate reaction is to lock down every endpoint, laptops, servers, you name it, and to push their zero-trust rollouts much faster and wider.
And zero trust is really the architectural answer to the insider threat. The old model of network security, the strong wall around the outside, the Cathal moat idea, that's over. Zero Trust throws that idea out. It assumes no one is trustworthy by default. Every user, every device, every application has to be continuously authenticated and authorized before it can access anything. And to do that, you need something called microsegmentation.
And that's where the real work and the real spending happens, right? Microsegmentation for a huge platform means you're breaking your internal network into tiny, isolated zones. The idea is that an employee in, say, the finance department shouldn't even be able to see the database with customer identities, let alone access it. That granular restriction is what prevents a single compromised account from turning into a massive data leak.
It's a constant challenge because your security policies have to follow the data itself, not just the network perimeter. And that's why the companies that provide these kinds of solutions are in such high demand. CrowdStrike, which is CRWD, is a perfect example. Their whole platform is cloud native, and it gives you that real-time visibility across all your endpoints. A company needs to be able to spot when a legitimate user account starts doing something illegitimate, like trying to download 3,000 customer files. CrowdStrike's tech is designed to flag those kinds of anomalies.
And then you have the broader network players like Palo Alto Networks, PANW. They're known for firewalls, but they're absolutely critical for making a zero-trust architecture actually work. Their platform is what enforces all those granular microsegmentation rules across the entire network, making sure the policies are consistent everywhere.
Right. And we should also mention Fortinet, FTNT. Fortinet's strength is in helping unify what are often very messy, complex security setups in large companies. You can't really move to a full zero-trust model if your different security tools can't even talk to each other. Fortinet helps create that unified foundation.
Okay, so if zero trust is about limiting what a user can do, the next category is about controlling who they are. This is identity and access management, or PM. And this is a direct response to the Coupang incident because the whole thing started with a former employee's access.
Right, this gets to the root cause.
It does. This area provides the tools you need to manage who has access to what and when. The first principle here has to be least privilege access. It means an employee only gets the bare minimum permissions they need to do their job, and nothing more. The challenge for a big e-commerce platform is applying that principle to thousands of people across hundreds of systems. It requires constant auditing.
And tied directly to that is key management. A lot of insider breaches exploit poorly managed credentials, especially the automated service accounts that let applications talk to databases. If the keys for those accounts are never changed, a former employee who knows the system can exploit them long after their own login is disabled.
But doesn't that level of control, constantly auditing every single account and restricting access so tightly, doesn't that create a lot of friction and slow things down?
It can, but companies justify it because the cost of not doing it is so much higher, as we see here. And that brings us to session recording. For your most powerful users, your database admins, your top engineers companies are now recording everything they do. It creates a perfect audit trail. If an admin runs a query to pull 3,000 names, it's recorded. That's invaluable evidence for an investigation, and is what you need to present to a regulator to prove what happened.
And that takes us back to the original failure point at Coupang, the former employee. So this drives demand for much stronger automated offboarding. When someone leaves, their access to everything needs to be cut instantly, not just their email, but every single system.
Exactly. And the companies providing these solutions are obviously in a great position. You got Okta, that's OKTA. They are leaders in cloud identity management. Their systems are key for implementing things like multi-factor authentication and for automating those offboarding workflows.
And for protecting the really sensitive stuff, the keys to the kingdom, that's where a company like CyberArk comes in. Ticker is CYBR. CyberArk is all about privileged access management. Their tools are what you use to enforce those least privilege models and do the session recording for high privilege users. They basically put a vault around your most critical data. Okay, so the third category winners here would be the services that come in after a breach has already happened. The cleanup crew, essentially.
Right.
The software is for prevention, but once the damage is done, you need outside experts to manage the crisis and, more importantly, to satisfy the regulators. This means bringing in incident response teams to investigate and contain the threat. But the really expensive part is the reporting you have to do for the government, proving you've fixed the problem.
And that prove it part is absolutely essential, especially when a ministry is on the record saying they don't believe your initial claims. You need external consultants to do a full forensic analysis, validate your fixes, and provide a report that the regulator will actually accept. And this kind of consulting goes way beyond just the tech. It can force changes in HR, legal, all the way up to the executive level. It's a high-margin, necessary expense after a breach.
So this puts the spotlight on the major providers of these services. IBM, and specifically IBM Security, is one. They have deep expertise in these large-scale incident response situations and the compliance reporting that goes with them.
Accenture is another one, ACN. Their consulting practice does a lot of work on cybersecurity maturity and the big transformation projects that follow a major failure like this. They don't just fix the technical problem, they help restructure the company's entire approach to security governance.
And finally, for the pure forensic work, you have to mention Alphabet, Googl, through their Mandiant division. Mandiant has a global reputation for deep dive incident response. When you need to prove to a regulator exactly what happened, how it happened, and that it's contained, they are often one of the first calls.
All right, now we have to look at the other side of the coin. While the cybersecurity companies are benefiting, the consumer-facing platforms that hold all this data are facing some serious headwinds. Their costs are going up, and market sentiment is turning against them.
Well, the most obvious one is Coupang itself, CPNG. They're facing the most immediate risk. That unresolved investigation creates a drag on the stock, and no matter what happens, we know they're going to have to spend a lot more on security to satisfy the ministry.
And the risk is higher because the regulatory environment in South Korea is known to be very tough on consumer data protection. When a regulator publicly criticizes you, it's often a signal that a substantial fine could be on the way if they find you were at fault.
And the market tends to spread that risk around, right? It doesn't just stay with Coupang. It affects similar platforms, especially those in other high-growth markets. A good example here would be C Limited, ticker SE. C Limited runs Shopee, a huge e-commerce platform in Southeast Asia. They handle a similar kind of massive customer data set. The moment a regulator in a major market like South Korea cracks down on Coupang, investors start to see a higher compliance risk for SE across the whole region.
Yes, the thinking is that if the South Korean ministry sets a tough precedent, other regulators in Asia will likely follow. That means the cost of doing business just went up for everyone in that space. The next sector feeling the pressure is the on-demand delivery and logistics apps. This group is structurally vulnerable to insider risk because of how their business models are built.
What do you mean by structurally vulnerable?
Well, they rely on huge data sets of addresses and personal information just to function. That makes them a valuable target. But the real exposure comes from their workforce.
Right. They use a massive number of operational accounts for drivers, warehouse workers, contractors. These aren't traditional employees. It's a constantly changing group of people.
And that means they have to grant and revoke access on a massive scale all the time for thousands of external users on all sorts of devices.
So those frequent offboarding workflows are a huge potential point of failure. If a driver leaves on a Tuesday, but their access to delivery data isn't cut until Friday, that's a 3-day window of risk.
On top of that, these contractors often use their own phones, a bring-your-own-device policy. That makes implementing something like Zero Trust incredibly difficult and expensive. You have to enforce the same strict security on a personal phone as you do on a corporate laptop.
The bottom line is that platforms like DoorDash, DASH, and Uber, UBER, are going to face higher compliance costs after an event like Coupang's. Investors and regulators will push them to prove they can handle the security risks that are just baked into their business model. And that spending doesn't add revenue, it just adds cost.
It's a huge operational burden that the Coupang incident really shines a light on for that entire sector.
Okay, and the final group facing headwinds is ad tech and other data-driven platforms. The connection here might seem a bit indirect, but it's very real.
It is. It's a predictable policy feedback loop. When a big data breach hits the headlines, it gives politicians and regulators the justification they need to push for stricter privacy enforcement. For these data-driven businesses, the result could be pretty severe. Stricter enforcement makes companies less willing to share or use customer data for advertising. The legal and compliance risks of holding that data start to outweigh the marketing benefits. It puts a chill on the whole data economy.
And that directly impacts the core functions of ad tech targeting and measurement. If you can't use granular data to target ads, or you can't measure if those ads are working because of privacy rules, the whole value of the platform starts to decrease. This is a problem for programmatic players like The Trade Desk, ticker TTD. Their entire business is built on using data to help advertisers find the right audience. If that data becomes harder to access or use, it creates real friction for their business.
And of course, this extends to the biggest data platforms of all. Meta Platforms, META, has tremendous exposure here. even though they mostly use their own first-party data. Any new regulations about how they process and store that data put pressure on their business model. Every new rule means more expensive compliance work. The cost of data isn't about acquiring it anymore. It's about managing the risk of holding it. An incident like Coupang's is a reminder to everyone that if you hold the data, you also hold the liability for protecting it perfectly.
So looking at everything we've discussed today, it seems the clear theme is that securing against internal risk and having really tight access controls is now a central issue for any large company that handles data.
That's the trade-off, and it's a predictable one. If regulators get tougher after seeing an incident like this, the spending will flow to the identity, endpoint security, and incident response companies. So you're looking at sustained budget increases for firms like Okta, OKTA, CyberArk, CYVR, CrowdStrike, CRWD, and Palo Alto Networks, PANW.
And on the other side, the consumer platforms like Coupang CPNG, the logistics apps like Uber and DoorDash, and the ad tech companies will probably face higher operating costs and stricter rules on how they can even use their data.
I think the final thought for you to consider is this long-term priority. For years, the main security focus was on external threats keeping hackers out. This incident shows that securing systems from the inside, from employees, former employees, contractors, is just as costly, and you could argue even more critical now. This focus on internal controls, on implementing true least privilege access, is what's going to drive tech investment for the foreseeable future.
Please remember that this presentation is not financial advice or a recommendation to buy or sell any securities. This is purely the opinion of the author of the material reviewed.